My všichni ostatní zamíříme do Velké Británie. A to v přetočeném příspěvku Roba Webstera z University College of London, mimo jiné autora programu maximalizace dopadů asistentů pedagoga, který pohovoří o tom, jak zvládali distanční výuku a následný návrat dětí do škol ve Velké Británii a hlavně o tom, jak se do této nelehké doby nebo tohoto nelehkého úkolu chopili asistenti a asistentky pedagogů. Ten příspěvek je přetočený a poté bude pár minut na možnosti položit Robu Websterovi otázky online. Takže prosím.
Hello, everybody. I hope that you are enjoying the conference. My name is Rob Webster. I am an associate professor at UCL Institute of Education in the UK. I've been asked to spend a bit of time talking with you about how in the UK the pandemic has affected children with special educational needs, and a group of people who tend to spend a lot of time, in fact almost all of their time, attending to their educational needs in schools, and that is teaching assistants. So what I'm proposing to do is just kind of run you through some of the sort of latest research and some of the thinking and the situation in the UK, which in the preparation for this presentation I learned is not dissimilar to what we've been going through in the UK and the sort of political reaction. So you'll be able to kind of overlay these experiences from the UK into the Czech context. So I just wanted to start first of all just with just a little bit of context in terms of the UK system. So we have a large proportion of our schools workforce in the UK are employed as teaching assistants, and you can see from the table there that the numbers of teaching assistants, or rather the proportion of the workforce who are employed as teaching assistants, has gone up quite a bit over the last 20 years. And currently about 28% of people who are working in our schools in England are teaching assistants. And if you look just in primary and nursery infant school context, it's about a third of staff. So there's a lot of people employed in the English schools and in UK schools more generally to support teachers, support children with special educational needs, and they are certainly in the UK. Teaching assistants have grown to be really quite pivotal to what we do in schools in relation to inclusion. And my way of describing that is to make the comparison with teaching assistants being like the mortar in the brickwork of schools. They hold things together in schools in numerous and quite often unnoticed ways. And the experience of the last 18 months with the COVID pandemic has brought that to the fore in ways which we perhaps haven't been so visible before. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about some research that we did in the UK earlier this year, looking at how teaching assistants were involved in the pandemic and how they've experienced that pandemic, because there's been a lot of focus on how teachers and how school leaders have been, what they've been doing during the pandemic, but not very much attention at all for teaching assistants. So we some colleagues and I at UCL ran a survey of teaching assistants in the 4 UK regions. So that's England, Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. And I think the bulk of our 9,000 or so respondents were mostly in schools in England, which is just for clarification, the 4 regions of the UK operate a bit differently in education. So most of what I have to say is about the English context rather than the UK context, which there kind of isn't a UK one. As I say, it's sort of split up into 4 bits. So we had over 9,000 teaching assistants respond to our survey, which we sent out in January and February of this year, and that was in the while the country, the UK as a whole, was in a national lockdown. So schools were largely closed. They were open to children who were sort of more vulnerable, children with special educational needs, children of key workers, but by and large, to most children, sorry, they were closed. And what we found in our study was just how essential TAs were to schools staying open and supporting pupils and families during the pandemic. We found that about 90% of teaching assistants were in school during the lockdown period. So they were working in the school while teachers, we don't quite know the proportion, but certainly probably not 90%, probably a lot less than that, were actually working from home and delivering lessons by Zoom and so on from home. So teaching assistants were covering for staff absences. We found they were leading classes or bubbles, so smaller groups of children, doing this pretty much on their own in school. So it was teaching assistants who were sort of holding the fort, or minding the shop, if you like, during this period. But they were still getting on doing the things that they normally do, like delivering intervention programs and support packages for people who have special educational needs. And we also found that they were doing quite a lot of work in the community as well. So they were going around homes of families that they were most concerned about, the school were most concerned about, delivering food parcels for families that needed it, or delivering learning materials for families who didn't have an internet connection and couldn't do the Zoom lessons or needed the equipment, and just generally checking in that people were okay. So a role that they don't normally do was something that was taking up quite a bit of their time during the lockdown. And the teaching assistants told us that they felt that they had taken on a greater risk during this time. So they were in school a bit more exposed to COVID. They felt that was a risk that they sort of had to take, really. They had less say in where they would be working. And also that they felt forgotten about. So there was a lot of talk during the pandemic in the UK about, and a kind of national appreciation for key workers, people in the health service, teachers and so on. And those conversations that were being had just didn't really include the word teaching assistant. So I think that they probably felt that they were doing all of this work, but not really, people didn't really realise it was the teaching assistants who were doing as much as they were. Just sort of looking at things from the perspective of children with special educational needs in the UK. So these things are slightly come together, what teaching assistants were doing and experience of children with special needs. And the children with special needs, the roughly 3% of them who have a legal document recognising their needs and detailing the provision that they should have, schools were open to these children. So they fell into the category of you can go to school during this period. And in effect, what that meant was that all of our special schools were open, because all the children in the special schools have one of these legal documents. And what again, I was involved in some research where we had a look at this, and specifically with the children who were in special schools, we found that even though the schools were sort of open to them and they could attend, actually it wasn't the case that all the children were in all of the time. In fact, there was quite a low take-up of that offer. Parents preferring instead to have their children at home and not in perhaps a school environment where they might be exposed. to COVID. So there was low take-up and low attendance in special schools. It's a bit hard to know what was happening in the mainstream or the regular schools because the data is a bit vague on that. We from what we understand, children with special needs, wherever they were having a bit more difficulty with remote learning. So the learning and the teaching that was supplied wasn't very often not targeted for them. So there was a bit of a shortfall there. And the children who had these legal documents, these plans, they often come with additional support for help from health and social care. So things like therapies as well. And virtually all of that was suspended over particularly the lockdown periods. And some of the parents we spoke to of children with special needs in the course of our research, they also talked about feeling abandoned. And actually it was very challenging for a lot of families having children with quite complex needs at home 24/7 with no respite at all and very little coming from the school by way of learning activities to keep them progressing. And one of the kind of best estimates we have, it's not massively reliable because it's based on self-report from school leaders, is that children in special schools are probably somewhere between 5 and 6 months behind where you would have expected them to be. And the same is probably true to some extent of children with special needs in mainstream. But like I said, the data is not entirely clear on that. And just for the purposes of comparison, for typically developing pupils, it's somewhere in the order of about 2 to 3 months behind where schools would have expected them to be. So in a sense, what we're seeing is children with special needs, wherever they're educated, normally hardest hit by the pandemic. And things like concerns about mental health and well-being being particularly acute in this population, and that maybe talk by some commentators that this is going to be the next pandemic, a kind of mental health and well-being crisis among our children and young people, and that's going to hit children with special needs again the hardest. And what we're kind of learning as the country has been sort of opened up for quite a while now, and children have been back at school since the summer break for a month. As I'm recording this, and I think this kind of estimate comes from about the summertime, actually, so just before this school year, that about 20% of children with special needs were not returning to school after the pandemic. These are mostly children in special schools, so a lot of concern again about the safety of those school environments. And also some issues with staffing as well. So currently, as I speak, there's a schools all over the place are having difficulty keeping open and keeping staffed because children and staff are testing positive for COVID. So it's a very, very unsettled picture. And in fact, I mean, just sort of going a little bit more widely and just saying a little bit about the UK response and where we're heading now in terms of a plan for COVID recovery. The situation in the UK has been chaotic at best, really. I think it has the policies relating to schools and policies related to special schools in particular have been very poorly handled. Special schools and children with special needs and their families very much feel like they've been put to the back of the queue when addressing lockdown, when addressing learning loss and in the recovery. And at the political level, we've had resignations and sackings of key people who are important in all of this. So the Minister for Education over the last 2 years, who oversaw what was happening in the pandemic, was probably the least popular person in the country. He was just incredibly disorganised, and a lot of fair criticism, I think, was levelled at his particular handling of schools. And he was relieved of his duties a couple of weeks ago. So we've had a change in that position in government. the person that the government appointed as their catch-up czar, as they call it, so somebody who's going to advise on what to do for COVID catch-up, quit his post because the government were only prepared to fund about 10% of the money that he said was needed for any kind of decent catch-up plan. So the plan as it is, as it relates to children with special needs, is very vague. We're still, in a sense, we're still sort of waiting to see what the government thinks about this. It's the plan overall for COVID recovery for pupils is pretty poorly funded, particularly compared with elsewhere in the world. In the USA and in the Netherlands are particularly generous with their funding for COVID catchment. It's very paltry in the UK, and as you imagine, there's quite a lot of outcry about that, and no clear recovery plan for children with special needs or how that might be funded. So again, it's all adding to the general sense of uncertainty and the lack of clarity. The general approach is one around offering tutoring to pupils. So talking mainly here, well, about all pupils really, in mainstream schools, that they would have some kind of one-to-one or small group tutoring for catch-up. The process for that, rolling that out, has been very slow, and the take-up has been poor. And that's pretty much kind of where we've got to. Schools, again, are just sort of working out for themselves and doing the very best that they can. And there is seemingly no defined role for teaching assistants in the recovery plan. So you haven't really seen their name mentioned. Nobody's come on the telly or the radio to explain what teaching assistants might be doing as part of the recovery plan, which for those who've kind of been watching the situation for as long as I have, comes as no real surprise. Teaching assistants have been a long-standing policy blind spot in the UK. You know, you saw earlier on just how big they are, big portion of the workforce they are, but very little by way of thinking, how do you best use that capacity in our schools, particularly at a moment like this with the recovery. There is also a comprehensive review of special needs that has been well, apparently completed. It's been delayed by about 2 years, and there's a lot of talk about, well, how is that going to cohere with the COVID recovery plan? So again, it's just yet another ingredient in this sort of mix of uncertainty. I wish I could offer you more clarity here, but just the situation that we're in presently. There is, however, there is something of a plan that could be put together for schools in terms of involving teaching assistants in COVID recovery and beyond that. And in a sense, it comes down, I think, to thinking about using teaching assistants in two ways. One is to deploy them to deliver structured programs for literacy and numeracy to help pupils catch up, to make up for the time out of the classroom. And there's a fairly well-developed evidence base on this that shows that if you train teaching assistants to deliver these intervention programs, they have an impact on attainment. And the kind of average across a range of programs is about 5 additional months of progress. So it's right bang where we need it. If children with special needs have lost about 5 months of learning, then this is probably the best and quickest way we can try to rebuild it in those core areas of literacy and numeracy. And the other thing, and this is relatively fresh, is work that I've been involved with around improving pupils' learning behaviour. So that if the catch-up interventions attend to academic attainment, then the work that we've been doing through our Maximising the Impact of Teaching Assistants programme is really about attending to the non-academic side of things. It's the soft skills, building up pupils' independence and engagement, and that re-engaging in the classroom, re-engaging in processes and patterns and procedures and just the whole business of learning and that sort of development that you're doing, perhaps if you're in infant or primary schools around, around independence. And this is essentially what we do in our Maximise the Impact of Teaching Assistants program. We help schools train their TAs in a process to scaffold learning. So they're helping pupils with their engagement and their independence by providing the least amount of help first. So previous research from the UK has shown that teaching assistants often just do a bit too much for children and they grow a sort of dependency on that support. And the work we do is intended to put that into reverse and look at the benefits of teaching assistants supporting pupils to, do more for themselves, to become more independent and skilled learners. And quite recently, there was an independent evaluation of our programme, Maximise the Impact of Teaching Assistants, involving over 120 primary schools in England. And the evidence from that was that, in a sense, MITRE does what it says it does. It improves. There were improvements to the way teaching assistants were deployed and prepared. There are improvements in the ways in which they spoke to pupils in their learning interactions, and that had a knock-on effect in terms of pupil independence and engagement. So we got some good evidence now from this sort of side of the evidence base that we can deploy TAs in such a way that they can help the skills that are needed and behaviour that underpin learning. And obviously together with the stuff on and we've got promising way of deploying teaching assistants, have a sufficient plan. So if you want to find out more about the research that we've been doing and generally the guidance and the advice and so on that we've been giving to schools in the UK, you can find it on our website. There's stuff there that you can have a look at and download for free. I'm afraid it's not in Czech, but hopefully the more skilled linguists among you will be able to pick your way through that. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you have a good rest of conference. Thank you. Goodbye.
Tak to byl Rob Webster z Velké Británie, z University College of London, přetočený, ale teď bychom měli být v živém spojení, tak ano, je to tak. Dobrý den.
Good morning.
Hello, good morning to you.
Tak máme tady zase prostor. Robe, zdravíme z Prahy a chtěla bych poděkovat za to, co jsme slyšeli a máme tady prostor pro 1, 2, možná 3 otázky, tak tolik na úvod.
So Rob, good morning from Prague. Thank you for joining us and we have, I think, the time for 1, 2 or 3 questions directed to you.
Good morning, everybody.
Tak prosím, je-li tu někdo z vás, tak určitě dám ráda přednost, abyste mohli využít čas Roba Webstera pro sebe.
So are there any questions from the audience?
Tak ne, takže se ujmu já a to, když jsem poslouchala tu prezentaci, mě napadla taková věc, je to velmi podobné České republice, ale ráda bych se zeptala, jestli tedy jsem rozuměla dobře, že vládní strategie pro jednak tedy dohnání výuky po covidu, ale vůbec ta vzdělávací strategie s asistenty, asistentkami pedagogů příliš nepočítá?
What you've mentioned here in your presentation reminded me very much of the situation in the Czech Republic. And when I was listening to it, I had to think about the fact, and I wanted a clarification on this, that as you've spoken about it, it seems that the official, let's say, catch-up program, or perhaps the UK education strategy in general, does not really count on teaching assistants at all. Is my impression correct?
Yes. Yeah, in a word, yes. As I said in the presentation, this goes back further than COVID in probably near enough 15, 20 years. As the number of teaching assistants has grown, the sort of policy program just hasn't developed alongside it. So despite having more teaching assistants in our schools, there's never been a view formed by policymakers and people at the government level about what they should be doing. And that just would strike anybody coming to the situation new for the first time from outside the UK, as well as people who've been involved in this and watching this for as long as I have, as just being odd at the very least. If you have 25% or so of everybody working in the schools in the country, then you almost logically have to have a view about what it is they're going to do and what it is you don't want them to do, because the risk is they'll be doing things you hadn't planned on them doing, and they won't be doing things that you think they could be doing, which are helpful. And so, in a sense, what we've seen with the COVID recovery program is just another expression of something that's a lot longer lasting, on policymakers just having a blind spot in a way. They'll look at what teachers are doing, but they've forgotten all about these other people in the school that they could be using, with just a little bit of thought, really.
Thank you. Tedy odpověď zcela jednoduše je ano. Skutečně je to tak, že ta situace, která se netýká jenom covidu a která tady trvá už nějakých 20 let, je taková, že ačkoliv stoupá počet asistentů pedagoga ve školách, není to nějakým způsobem reflektováno v politických rozhodnutích, ve vzdělávacích strategiích. To znamená, tyto strategie nedrží s vývojem počtu asistentů krok. Člověk, který se na to dívá zvenčí, který se v tom třeba nepohybuje tak dlouho jako já, se diví a připadá mu to přinejmenším zvláštní, že když roste počet asistentů pedagoga, tak vláda vlastně nemá představu, co by měli dělat. Nicméně je to tak. I když je 25% vlastně všech pracovníků ve školách zaměstnáno právě na pozici asistentů pedagoga, neexistuje jasná strategie nebo představa, co by měli dělat. Vláda se tím příliš nezabývá a ten plán obnovy po covidu je jenom dalším příkladem toho, co už platí v podstatě dlouhou dobu. Tedy, že asistenti pedagoga jsou přehlíženi, řeší se role učitelů, řeší se jejich zapojení, ale vláda vlastně nemá jasnou představu o tom, jakým způsobem by mohli asistenti pedagoga fungovat, a pokud ji nemá, tak je těžké od nich požadovat některé konkrétní úkoly, nebo jim to naopak stěžuje práci, kterou by dělat mohli, ale vlastně proto nemají rámec.
Děkuji. Navážu další svojí otázkou, tedy zajímá mě, protože jste také řekl v tom videu, které jsme mohli vidět, že ve Velké Británii chybí personál ve školách, že ubývají žáci, že zkrátka se COVID zase šíří a že ten problém s pandemií zdaleka nemůžeme považovat za vyřešený na britských ostrovech, tak se chci zeptat, jestli z toho tedy zdaleka nejsme venku a jestli opět navzdory těm překážkám, které zazněly, nastává doba, kdy práce asistentů a asistentek pedagoga bude důležitější než kdy jindy.
From what I've heard in the presentation, it seems to me that the COVID, at least in the UK and everywhere else, of course, is not over yet. You've mentioned the numbers of teachers and pupils going down again, and schools struggling to keep the schools staffed because of positive testing. So it seems the pandemic is not over yet, and so do you foresee for teaching assistants to again have to take on the more important role they played during the lockdown? So do you expecting the situation to repeat itself, in fact?
I think we ought to be preparing for it. Things are still there's a lot of uncertainty around. The numbers of the proportion of children who are being tested positive for COVID in our schools is quite high. I think at one point last week it was something like 1 in 12 children were testing positive, and they were having to isolate for 10 days. In fact, my son is at home on the 9th of his 10-day incarceration at home for having tested positive for COVID last weekend. So he's okay. He's just going stir crazy and driving us all mad by singing songs from The Lion King morning, noon, night. But that's that. You know, he doesn't have any serious symptoms of COVID. But it's very concerning to people in schools, understandably, and school staff are being affected as well. The reporting of this is somewhat uneven, I would say. There is I don't want to infer any suspicious motives here, but there seems to be a story from schools which is not quite breaking through into the evening news about, you know, that's kind of where COVID is at the moment. In the main, it's in schools, and it's not. It's perhaps being contained at the moment, but as we get further into the autumn and into the winter, you know, there is the potential for us to experience what we did in the UK last winter, which was the most serious phase of the pandemic that we've had. We've got a pretty good vaccination program in the UK, and the vast majority of adults are double vaccinated. So it's probably not going to be anywhere near as bad as it was, unless we get another variant of it which somehow finds its way around the vaccines. But I think I mean, I'm not a medical expert at all, so what do I know? But from what I pick up in the news, it's unlikely to be as serious as it was, and I think the government here, they really want to keep the schools open. I think they realise that as soon as the schools start closing, the people are off work and so on. So if we are back in that situation, I think we will be drawing again on the teaching assistants to kind of step in and do what they did before. So I'd imagine if we do sort of drift back to that situation, then we'll be using TAs in much the same way. Whether or not they will be acknowledged for the contribution they make, I don't know. I would hope that there might be a bit more recognition of what's going on, because you know, as I've said in the presentation, it's been another aspect of underreporting of the situation in the UK has been around teaching assistants, and you know, as I said, I don't know what schools would have done without them, frankly, and I don't think that's really been acknowledged publicly by our leaders.
Myslím, že bychom se na to měli připravovat, že taková situace nastane. Rozhodně panuje v tomto ohledu značná nejistota. Jak jsem říkal v prezentaci, tak ten počet nakažených mezi dětmi i mezi učiteli roste, vlastně relativně vysoký. Myslím, že minulý týden bylo pozitivně testováno každé 12. dítě, což znamená, že vlastně každé z těch dětí musí na 10 dní do izolace. Mimochodem se to týká i mého vlastního syna, který měl pozitivní test minulý víkend. Naštěstí je v pořádku, nemá žádné velké příznaky, takže hlavně doma řádí. Ale je to ilustrace toho, že ta situace skutečně tady je a má dopad na chod škol. V každém případě je to něco, co byť se neobjevuje na hlavních stránkách novin, je relativně význačné, tedy to, že COVID je v podstatě hlavně ve školách, že školy jsou v současné době tím zdrojem, odkud se pandemie šíří. Potenciálně bychom se mohli dostat i do situace, ve které jsme byli minulou zimu, kdy tedy ta situace byla nejvážnější. Nicméně doufejme, že zafunguje očkovací program, který je v Velké Británii poměrně úspěšný. V podstatě velká většina dospělých byla očkována 2 dávkami a můžeme tedy doufat, že ta situace nedosáhne takové úrovně, takového stavu jako minulou zimu. Takže samozřejmě nejsem zdravotnický odborník, ale z toho, co slyším ve zprávách, co se objevuje na veřejnosti jako informace, tak to, že bychom se navrátili k tak vážné situaci jako minulou zimu, příliš pravděpodobné není. V každém případě je tu vůle vlády udržet školy otevřené, protože vláda si uvědomuje ten obrovský ekonomický dopad toho, pokud by se znovu uzavřeli, rodiče by nemohli chodit do práce a tak dále. To znamená, doufejme, že ta situace tak vážná nebude, ale pokud se bude opakovat, bude zřejmě úloha asistentů pedagoga stejná jako tu minulou zimu. Otázka je, zda tahle jejich důležitá úloha bude lépe oceněna než minulou zimu. My bychom si to moc přáli, musíme v to doufat. A jak už jsem říkal v té prezentaci, skutečně práce asistentů pedagoga právě v této situaci pandemie je naprosto klíčová, hrají naprosto klíčovou roli a my tedy můžeme jenom doufat, že za ní budou i patřičně oceněni tentokrát.
Díky Robu Websterovi. Díky.
Zdravíme.
Zdravíme.
Thank you and hello to the UK.
Thank you very much. Have a good day where you are. Thank you. Goodbye.
Děkuji a přeji hezký den i vám.
A za bezchybné tlumočení díky Jiřině Holkupové. Díky.
Díky zač.